The air was thick with the scent of turkey and Leon's boasts about his fancy new bar. My father and Sylvia played the role of the perfect, supportive parents. I waited until their mouths were full, then asked, my tone flat, "Did the hospital send the surgery date yet?" Gregory smiled. "It came 7 days ago. We handled it." Sylvia boasted that they had temporarily used the entire fund for Leon's bar. I placed my fork down. "Then you must not know," I said slowly, "who that surgery was actually for. My name is Lillian Hurst. I am 32 years old, and for the last 10 years, I've been the quiet cornerstone of this loud, beautiful lie." Thanksgiving dinner at the family's cabin, nestled in the leaf-draped outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio, was always a performance. Tonight was the premiere. The air was thick with the rich, comforting scent of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and the faint, sweet smoke from the stone fireplace that Gregory, my father, always insisted on having lit, regardless of the crisp autumn temperature outside. Glasses of deep garnet Cabernet were filled high. Mine, predictably, less than half full. My father, Gregory, was in his element, radiating the polished warmth of a successful man who believed his life was a testament to his own virtues. Beside him, Sylvia, my stepmother, was a vision of suburban elegance in a velvet dress, her smile wide and practiced. They were the executive producers of this domestic drama, embodying the roles of the generous, rock-solid Midwestern couple. They spoke in loud, booming confidence about their upcoming vacation to the Caribbean and, most importantly, about Leon. Leon, my 37-year-old half-brother, was holding court at the end of the long mahogany table, gesturing wildly with a fork. He was dressed in trendy, expensive casual wear, a look that screamed disposable income, though I knew exactly whose income was being disposed of. "It's not just a bar, folks," Leon announced to a captive audience of distant cousins and a local pastor Gregory had invited. "It's an experience, 2,000 square feet of curated luxury, right downtown, top floor. We're calling it the Zenith. 99% guaranteed to be the hottest spot in the city. The launch party alone. We're talking fireworks, a live 10-piece jazz band, the works." Sylvia beamed, clasping Gregory's hand. "It's about family investment, Lillian," she declared, turning to me, making sure everyone within earshot understood the moral of the story. "Leon has vision. We are all on the same team. When the ship sails, we all sail with it." I hadn't spoken to them in 3 months, but here I was, at the heavy, historical Hearst table. Just as predicted. My silence was my camouflage. I watched, I listened, and I observed. I noted the new $50,000 watch Leon flashed, and the way Sylvia's diamond tennis bracelet caught the firelight. These glittering objects, I knew, were constructed of my 80-hour work weeks, my canceled house plans, and my deferred dreams. I tucked these observations away, cataloging every detail of their opulence. The only other person at the table who seemed to share my quiet air was Ivy, my 23-year-old half-sister, Gregory and Sylvia's biological daughter, sat across from me. She was an adult now, bright and sensitive, but she looked exhausted. Her skin was paler than usual beneath the soft dining room light, and she kept her shoulders hunched. When the conversation got too loud, usually when Leon was talking about securing a rare 200-year-old bottle of scotch for his bar, Ivy would give a small, brittle smile and retreat into herself, touching her side just above the line of her silk dress. She had been diagnosed with early-stage kidney disease a few months ago, a secret only I had truly taken seriously. The noise reached a fever pitch. A cousin was choking back a laugh at one of Gregory's old anecdotes about his business prowess. The pastor was nodding sagely. Leon was accepting a round of congratulatory clinks. The air was thick with self-satisfaction. It was the perfect moment. Everyone was distracted, warm with wine, and stuffed with the main course. Mouths were full. Defenses were down. I lifted my water glass, took a slow sip, and set it back on the coaster without a sound. I smiled. A small, genuine-looking lift of the corners of my mouth that didn't reach my eyes. "By the way," I said, my voice cutting through the din, deceptively soft and level, like the first crack in a sheet of ice. "The hospital, did they send the surgery date yet?" Gregory and Sylvia froze, exchanging a flicker of a glance, too fast for the pastor to notice, but not for me. Then, they recovered, laughing heartily, a theatrical sound that quickly drew the attention of the table. "Oh, yes, Lillian," Gregory boomed, waving a hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "That letter came last week. We handled it." Sylvia leaned in conspiratorially, lowering her voice just enough to make everyone strain to hear, adopting a tone of noble sacrifice. "Honestly, sweetie, the hospital was being ridiculous about that initial $190,000 deposit, but since the account was there and the timing was so crucial for Leon's launch—" She paused for dramatic effect, smoothing her dress. "We took the executive decision, as a family. We reallocated the funds. We needed the capital injection right now for the Zenith. It's an investment in all our futures. Darling, that money was just sitting there doing nothing. We paid the deposit, and we'll refill that little fund as soon as the bar starts printing money. It's a temporary loan." They looked at me, expecting a nod, a sign of gratitude for their decisive financial genius. Instead, I placed my fork down precisely onto the side of my plate. The delicate clink was startlingly loud in the sudden, expectant silence. I looked at Gregory, then at Sylvia, then at the proud, oblivious Leon. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. "I see," I said, drawing the words out, letting the full weight of the statement settle. I fixed my gaze squarely on Gregory's eyes, watching the performative smile on his face slowly melt away into confusion, then dawning dread. "Then you must not know," I finished, my voice now cold, flat, and absolute. "Who that surgery was actually for." The room went instantly, shatteringly silent. The laughter died. The glass clinking stopped. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, counting down the seconds until everything they believed about their perfect, functional, dependent family dissolved. The silence I dropped onto the Thanksgiving table was the cold snap that had been building for 10 years. It was the moment I realized the price of that silence was exactly $190,000, and it was gone. My mind didn't dwell on the stunned faces around the turkey. It flashed back, skipping like a damaged record, through a decade of fluorescent lights, sticky notes, and the constant hum of a server room. For 10 years, my professional life at Orion Ridge Data Works, a colossal tech firm headquartered in Columbus, was a slow-motion success story. I started as a junior analyst. Hungry and driven, I became a senior data analyst, then a lead, managing a team of 4 people. My salary was excellent, rising steadily through 6 promotions and countless performance bonuses. Yet, I lived like a college graduate still paying off loans. My apartment in Columbus was small, on the 3rd floor of a block built in the 1970s. The couch was bought used. The furniture was a patchwork of hand-me-downs and pieces I'd assembled myself from flat-pack boxes. My car was a beat-up sedan with 200,000 miles on the odometer and a persistent rattle in the engine that I couldn't justify fixing. My daily fuel was instant ramen, frozen dinners, and the caffeine poured into chipped mugs. I habitually worked late, clocking 60 to 70 hours a week, chasing deadlines, not career recognition, but cash. I was working to keep up. Every time a raise or an annual bonus hit my account, Gregory or Sylvia would summon a family crisis. It began small. "Your mother's old insurance bill is past due. Lillian, just $3,000 to clear it." Then, the house in Cleveland needed a new roof, a sudden $25,000 expenditure. Then it was Leon's early, failed ventures, the sandwich shop that lost money for 8 months, the organic juice bar that never opened. Each required a panicked phone call, usually from Gregory, always concluding with the desperate plea, "You're the only one we can rely on. Lillian, You're the responsible one." Leon was the master of the vision. He never failed to show up in my tiny apartment with oversized architectural drawings and glossy pitch decks for his next great idea. The speakeasy, the digital art lounge, the boutique distillery. He'd talk about the vision and the equity and the future of the Hearst legacy. He'd sound so convincing, so passionately entrepreneurial. I'd wire the $15,000, the $20,000, the $30,000, and then Leon would vanish for months, only to resurface with a new, equally brilliant, equally expensive vision when the last one had collapsed. Gregory, the patriarch, was the true emotional puppet master. He never asked outright for a gift. He asked for repayment. He would sit me down, or more often, call me late at night, and launch into the same monologue, the hardship of raising me after my mother died. Working 2 or 3 jobs, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices. He turned love, memory, and parental duty into a financial debt I could never fully service. "I gave up everything so you could have this career," he'd say, his voice thick with controlled emotion. "It's only right that you help your family now." That emotional ledger was always open, always accruing interest, because I was haunted by the need to repay. The guilt was instant and physical every time the phone rang after 11 p.m. A call that late was rarely to say hello. It was always a financial emergency. A credit card minimum due immediately, an ambiguous medical expense for the family, or a check that had bounced. I learned to keep an emergency buffer of at least $5,000 in my checking account at all times, just for the inevitable late-night wire transfer. Ivy was the only dissenting voice in their orchestrated need. She was younger, and I had tried to shield her from the worst of the chaos, but she saw it. Sometimes, after a Thanksgiving or a Christmas visit, she would text me quietly, or corner me briefly by the front door. "Please stop sending the money, Lillian. Please, you need it more." But Sylvia would always intervene, catching Ivy's glance or overhearing her plea, dismissing it with a sharp laugh. "Ivy, darling, don't concern yourself with adult affairs. Lillian is doing wonderfully. She loves helping her family. She understands what's important." I kept sending the money. I kept working. I kept telling myself that I was building stability for them, not just financing their volatility. But there was one sacred reserve I had created: the specific medical trust fund. It was separate, earmarked, dedicated. I told myself that no matter how chaotic their spending became, no one would ever touch money related to health. It was the one piece of my financial life that felt truly untouchable, a bastion of responsibility in a sea of dependency, until the moment Sylvia had casually mentioned reallocating the little fund for fireworks and luxury scotch. The revelation wasn't a sudden explosion of anger. It was a cold, sharp decompression. The decade of sacrifice suddenly clicked into agonizing focus. I wasn't a generous daughter or a supportive sister. I was an ATM with a conscience, dispensing funds to keep the performance running. They weren't just living off my money. They were living on my finite energy, my lost weekends, and the physical toll of 120 months of pure, unadulterated labor, all without a single pang of shame. They had taken the final, sacred reserve, the one I had planned to use for saving a life, and used it to launch a bar. The realization was complete. I had been paying for their lives with mine, and I was done. I was 2 hours into a pitch meeting with an investor group in Chicago when my phone vibrated with an unfamiliar number. I silenced it, irritated, when it buzzed again, with a frantic text message, "Call me emergency Ivy." I knew the performance was over. It was Ivy's roommate. I drove the 6-hour distance back to Cleveland straight through, violating at least 3 speed limits. I found Ivy in the emergency room at the Cleveland Clinic, looking small and intensely vulnerable in a thin hospital gown. Her roommate had found her collapsed in the dorm bathroom. The attending physician, a young woman with a calm demeanor, pulled me into a small consultation room. The diagnosis was delivered with clinical precision: acute renal failure. Stage 3 to stage 4 progression. "It's genetic. Unfortunately," the doctor explained, pointing to a dimly lit scan. Her kidney function is hovering around 20%. We need to stabilize her immediately, but without a transplant plan in place. She's looking at a future heavily reliant on dialysis, maybe 3 times a week, for life. My response was automatic, analytical. I asked about the rate of degradation, the efficacy of immunosuppressants, and the success rate of living donor transplants versus deceased donor transplants. I understood the data. I understood the consequence. What Gregory and Sylvia understood was the cost. When they finally arrived, 2 hours after I did, they were dressed for a social event they had canceled, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and fear. Dialysis? That's for old people, Gregory scoffed, ignoring the young physician. This is just the insurance company trying to scare us into expensive tests. Lillian, I bet the bill is already $50,000. Sylvia was worse. She didn't deny the disease. She blamed the patient. I told her that college cafeteria food would destroy her. It's her own fault for not taking the vitamins I bought her. This is not serious. It's just a lifestyle correction. They were in complete denial, refusing to absorb the medical reality, dismissing the doctor's seriousness as a theatrical ploy. The prospect of actual, long-term, life-altering illness was a complexity they simply refused to budget for, financially or emotionally. I realized then that this was my problem to solve, just like every other emergency in the last decade. I started the process in secret. I didn't want Ivy, already overwhelmed, to have to fight her own parents while fighting her body. I told her the hospitalization was just for advanced diagnostic testing, and promised her I would manage the logistics. She looked at me with trusting, exhausted eyes, and simply said, "Thank you, Lillian. I know you'll handle it." That trust, that quiet reliance, was more binding than any parental debt Gregory had ever manufactured. I went through the battery of tests, the genetic screenings, the blood work. The results came back a few weeks later. I was the perfect match, a 100% HLA match, an absolute gift. My own physician referred me immediately to Dr. Elias Monroe, the chief transplant surgeon at St. Alban Medical Center in Boston, known for its cutting-edge living donor program. The cost was staggering, even with my top-tier insurance. The initial deposit for the surgery, the post-operative care, and the required year of monitoring for Ivy was exactly $190,000. To secure the date, I liquidated everything: my company stock options, the small retirement investment I'd finally started, and the emergency savings that was supposed to be the down payment on a condominium in a quieter part of the city. I even sold the antique jewelry my birth mother had left me, something I had guarded fiercely. I established the Lillian Hurst Surgical Trust. The legal documents were ironclad, specifying the trust's sole and non-negotiable purpose: the full payment of kidney transplant surgery and related expenses for Ivy Hurst, contingent on my status as the living donor. Because my job often required me to be on the road for weeks at a time, in Singapore, in London, my lawyer insisted on inserting an emergency contingency clause. In the unlikely event that I or Ivy faced an immediate, life-threatening medical situation and I couldn't be reached, Gregory or Sylvia could request a full disbursement after an email confirmation and a subsequent verbal verification call. It was a measure to prevent the bureaucratic delays that could cost a life. I signed the papers, feeling a grim satisfaction. I was giving my sister a future, and I was paying for it with my own body and every cent I had accumulated outside of my basic checking account. I genuinely believed Gregory would see the sacred nature of the money. It was the price of saving his daughter, paid for with the health of his other daughter. I thought this was the line they would never cross. This was the one debt they would never try to collect, the one sacrifice they would respect. I could not have conceived of them using $190,000, money that ensured Ivy would not be tethered to a machine for the rest of her life, to pay for an extravagant rooftop grand opening featuring fireworks, live jazz, and rare, expensive liquor. The shock on Thanksgiving wasn't just that the money was gone, it was the shattering realization that in their minds, my sister's failing body and my willingness to sacrifice a part of mine were less important than Leon's latest, fleeting attempt at being a successful entrepreneur. I drove back to my apartment in Columbus, the 6 hours feeling like 60. The words I'd spoken at the dinner table, who that surgery was actually for, had been an opening salvo, not the conclusion. I needed data. I needed evidence of the theft. As soon as I was through the door, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I collapsed onto my worn couch, pulled out my laptop, and accessed the private bank app for the Lillian Hurst Surgical Trust. The screen lit up with the current balance. It wasn't the healthy $190,000 I'd left. It was $82.41. The number was a punch to the gut. The money that was meant to purchase Ivy a future free from dialysis had been replaced by pocket change. I pulled up the statement. The transfer had occurred 3 days before Thanksgiving, a single, enormous outgoing wire transfer, labeled simply, Event Management Services. I instantly recognized the company name. It was the high-end firm Leon had been boasting about hiring for the Zenith's grand opening. I then followed the digital trail back to the bank and the law firm that administered the trust. I reached a legal assistant late that evening, bypassing the usual bureaucracy by citing the medical emergency. He was hesitant, but eventually confirmed the sequence of events that had triggered the emergency release clause. A gentleman, Mr. Hurst, called. He provided the necessary password, and we received the required email authorization. The assistant explained. But the call was primarily from the wife, Mrs. Hurst. She was highly distressed. I found the authorizing email attached to the trust's record. It purported to be from my work email address, containing my electronic signature and a rushed message agreeing to the full disbursement for an urgent, unscheduled surgery that could not be delayed. The forgery was subtle, just enough to fool a busy clerk. Then came the audio transcript of Sylvia's call. I listened, my blood turning to ice. Her voice was thick with theatrical tears, a truly chilling performance. She claimed I was on a work trip in Eastern Europe, unable to call, begging them to release the money to save her child, her daughter, from dying on the operating table. She hadn't named Ivy. She had simply leveraged the emotional weight of a child in peril to steal a fortune. They didn't just take the money. They used my sister's disease and my own good faith clause to commit financial fraud. The clarity was stunning. There would be no more begging, no more guilt, no more repayment of imaginary debts. My first action was surgical. I logged into every single one of my personal and financial accounts. I canceled every joint card, every shared access, and changed every password. Gregory, Sylvia, and Leon were locked out of my life, financially and forever. The decades-old umbilical cord was severed with a single furious click. It was close to midnight when the pounding started. Not a polite knock, but a frantic, aggressive drumming on the solid wood of my apartment door. I didn't need to check the peephole. When I finally opened the door, they stood there, a collective portrait of self-entitlement and rage. Gregory, Sylvia, and Leon. Ivy was notably absent, probably safe in her dorm, or perhaps they simply hadn't needed her for this particular performance. They were disheveled, their faces flushed from too much wine and too much fury. The stale scent of expensive liquor and desperation wafted into my small hallway. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, Lillian?" Sylvia shrieked, her usual velvet-gloved demeanor shattered. Leon pushed past her, grabbing the doorframe. "My card was declined. The whole night. The supplier for the champagne called me. The DJ didn't get paid. We have less than 48 hours before we lose the entire license and the venue deposit. Where is the money?" Sylvia cut him off, her voice cracking with manufactured panic. "The $10,000 payment to the marketing agency bounced. We need the cash wired now. Lillian, now. You are jeopardizing everything. Our reputation, our credit scores. You just ruined the grand opening." I leaned against the wall, perfectly calm, letting their desperation wash over me. I noticed the key difference in their outrage. They were not upset about the theft. They were furious that the ATM had stopped dispensing cash. Gregory stepped forward, his face contorted in a mask of wounded paternal authority. This was his turn to deploy the shame tactics. "You have betrayed us, Lillian," he said, his voice dropping to a theatrical, wounded whisper. "After everything I did for you, I sacrificed my life so you could have yours. I worked 3 jobs. I went without so you could have everything. And this is how you repay me? You starve your own family? You sabotage your brother?" He leaned in close, trying to corner me with his guilt. "You need to fix this. Lillian, wire them $50,000, just to stabilize the situation. We can talk about the rest later. Open your purse, Lillian, for your father, for your family." Leon joined the chorus, adopting the role of the victim. "I just need a few weeks, Lil, just until the first night of profit. If this launch fails, the investors pull out, and the whole family loses the chance to change our lives. We'll be stuck in the past. Just get us through this one last hurdle." I looked at each of them. Gregory, desperate to maintain his power through my guilt. Sylvia, frantic over the collapse of her social image and her extravagant lifestyle. And Leon, the perpetual dreamer, demanding the continued funding of his fantasy. I straightened up, meeting the collective weight of their entitlement. "No," I said. "Just one word, quiet, clear, absolute. You committed fraud to steal money that was meant for Ivy's kidney transplant surgery. The bank has the records, the law firm has the transcripts, the IP address of the forged email came from your home network." They recoiled, the color draining from their faces as the reality of their crime hit them. "You are no longer my financial safety net," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "You are no longer my responsibility. Get out of my apartment, now." Gregory tried one last time, extending a shaking hand toward me. "We can talk about this in the morning. Lillian, we can repair this." I didn't move. "There is nothing left to repair. I am done being your source. If you don't leave immediately, I will be calling the police." The threat, backed by the sudden, terrifying mention of fraud, worked. They stumbled back, muttering threats and disbelief. Recognizing for the first time that the well had run dry and the gate was locked, the 3 of them retreated down the hallway, leaving behind only the bitter smell of expensive denial. The silence following the Thanksgiving confrontation was short-lived. Gregory, Sylvia, and Leon were not going to simply accept the loss of their financial life support. They didn't have a business to launch anymore. They had a vast, gaping hole in their budget, and they were desperate to reestablish control. Their desperation quickly curdled into something far more calculated and sinister. A few days after I ejected them from my apartment, I found a thick cream-colored envelope resting on the welcome mat. It bore no postage, suggesting it had been delivered by hand. Inside, the legal jargon felt like a physical assault. It was a petition to the Court of Ohio for the appointment of a guardian over my person and estate, filed by Gregory and Sylvia Hurst. The document was a chilling masterpiece of fabrication. They leveraged Ohio's guardianship statutes, which are designed to protect the vulnerable, and twisted them into a weapon. They painted a detailed, yet completely inverted, portrait of my reality. I, Lillian Hurst, was described as being gravely mentally unstable, exhibiting self-destructive behavior, and making financially irrational decisions that severely compromised the welfare of dependent family members. They had taken my decisive action, cutting off their access and demands, and warped it into evidence of a psychotic break. My refusal to continue funding Leon's luxury bar was presented as a symptom of delusions of persecution and paranoia regarding family exploitation. The documents claimed I was recklessly attempting to sever all familial ties due to an overwhelming sense of being taken advantage of, a delusion unsupported by fact. The conspiracy deepened with the inclusion of a purported medical report. The filing contained a professional psychiatric assessment signed by a Dr. Elias Vance, a name I had never encountered. The report suggested I suffered from severe clinical depression and high suicidal risk, recommending immediate mandatory medical supervision and the restriction of my liberty. The absurdity of a complete stranger diagnosing me with a life-threatening mental state was terrifying. The document then introduced a lineup of witnesses, It included affidavits from several of our neighbors near the old cabin and even some in my Columbus building. These statements were a blend of truth and malicious interpretation. Yes, I worked unusual hours. Yes, I kept my blinds closed constantly to manage light for my computer screens. And yes, I rarely socialized. These facts were interpreted in the filing as definitive signs of depression, social isolation, and escalating paranoia, bolstering the narrative that I was unfit to manage my own affairs. The ultimate goal, outlined in the petition, was to grant Gregory and Sylvia co-guardianship. This would immediately give them legal control over my entire financial life, all my accounts, investments, and my professional income. Crucially, it would also grant them the final say over my medical decisions, including the highly specific and personal choice regarding my upcoming kidney donation to Ivy. They included photographic evidence. These were screenshots of the few direct, aggressive texts I had sent Leon after his last failure. Messages like, "Get a job, Leon," or "I am stopping all funding for your life." But they had been digitally edited and cropped, stripped of context, to appear like desperate, rambling communications from someone losing control of reality. Tucked into the last page of the thick packet was an appendix, disguised as a plea for reconciliation. It was their olive branch, delivered with the cold precision of a ransom note. If I would voluntarily sign an agreement consenting to their financial guardianship, they would agree to waive the petition for guardianship over my physical person. They claimed this was to protect Lillian's dignity and professional reputation. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about the $190,000. That was gone. This was about power. My refusal to open my wallet had exposed their absolute dependency, and they were now using the blunt force of the legal system to permanently regain access. By seizing medical control, they weren't just taking my money. They were attempting to strip me of my bodily autonomy and the one decision I had made that was truly selfless, the donation of my own organ to save my sister. The hearing date was set for less than 2 weeks away. I felt the cold, hard weight of a coordinated attack, a deep dive into the legal thriller where the villains control the narrative, and the victim is locked out of her own life. They were trying to declare me legally insane so they could sell the second kidney. The clock was ticking, not just toward the court date, but toward Ivy's potential need for dialysis. I knew I couldn't fight a legal war against a coordinated lie by myself. I needed an ally who understood that the system could be weaponized. I called Raquel Avery. I had hired her 5 years ago to review an employment contract, and she specialized in civil litigation, particularly cases involving financial exploitation and guardianship abuse. She was sharp, aggressive, and had a reputation for not suffering fools. Exactly what I needed to slice through Gregory and Sylvia's carefully crafted facade. I dropped the thick guardianship petition onto her highly organized desk. She read the documents in silence, her expression moving from professional curiosity to a cold, focused anger. "They're using the incompetency loophole," Raquel stated, pushing the papers away. "In Ohio, these guardianship petitions are serious. If the court finds even a few % of their claims credible, a temporary guardian can be appointed instantly. You could lose control of your money and your medical decisions in one morning hearing. Your job is to prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that you are not only competent, but exceptionally functional." The defense strategy was immediate and demanding. Raquel instructed me to become a walking, talking resume of sanity. "I need every piece of evidence showing your functional capacity for the last 6 months," she commanded. "Employment contracts, performance reviews, every single paycheck stub, detailed email correspondence with clients and managers, awards, meeting schedules. We will prove that a person capable of managing multi-million-dollar data sets for a Fortune 500 company is not suffering from a psychotic break." Simultaneously, we initiated the medical counterattack. Raquel immediately reached out to Dr. Elias Monroe, the chief transplant surgeon at St. Alban Medical Center in Boston, the one who was overseeing my planned donation to Ivy. Dr. Monroe was initially cautious, concerned about patient confidentiality, but the gravity of the guardianship threat broke through. We explained that Gregory and Sylvia were trying to seize medical control to prevent or delay the surgery. Dr. Monroe readily agreed to help. He provided a detailed statement confirming my rigorous suitability for donation. He confirmed that I had undergone the mandatory psychological evaluation required of all living donors, which includes multiple sessions with a clinical psychologist. His findings were clear. Ms. Hurst demonstrated a complete, lucid understanding of the risks, benefits, and long-term consequences of the procedure. There was zero evidence of psychiatric instability, coercion, or any delusion related to self-harm or saving the family. Her decision to donate was fully autonomous and medically sound. This statement was the first major breach in Gregory's narrative of Lillian's self-destructive obsession. The second critical phase was forensic. Raquel hired a private IT specialist to analyze the digital components of the fraud. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about proving the conspiracy. The specialist successfully traced the originating IP addresses of two key fraudulent actions: the fake email to the bank authorizing the withdrawal of the $190,000, and a strange, preemptive inquiry to my health insurance about potential fraudulent psychological claims. The findings were definitive. 100% of those digital attacks originated from the Internet service provider linked directly to the residential address of Gregory and Sylvia Hurst in Cleveland. The evidence didn't point to my phone or my workplace in Columbus. It pointed to their kitchen table. Finally, we tackled the human element, the witnesses. Raquel dispatched a veteran private investigator to interview the neighbors whose affidavits claimed I was a depressive hermit living in isolation. The investigator reported back within 2 days. He secured recorded statements from 2 of the key witnesses. Both admitted that they barely knew me. They confessed that an acquaintance of Leon had approached them, offering them a few $100s each simply to sign some documents without reading the contents, telling them it was just to help Leon with a family dispute. The sudden relief was immense, almost overwhelming. I realized that the picture of crazy Lillian they had painted was full of verifiable seams. Their lies were sloppy, built on the assumption that I would be too shamed or too broken to fight back, or that the court would simply accept the word of the seemingly respectable parents over the word of the isolated daughter. Raquel smiled grimly, seeing the strength of our case materialize. "They thought they were performing a quiet legal ambush," she said, "but they left a massive paper trail and 2 paid witnesses. We are no longer just defending your sanity, Lillian. We are prosecuting their conspiracy." She prepared the final, most devastating move, securing Dr. Monroe's agreement to testify. This meant that on the day of the hearing, Dr. Monroe would be ready to present Ivy's severe, life-threatening medical status and then reveal, under the protection of the court, that the funds intended to save her life, the money taken from the donor, were instead spent on a failed bar opening. The personal betrayal would become public record. The small team, comprised of a lawyer, a doctor, and me, the so-called madwoman, was now ready to face the system. With the hearing only 7 days away, the legal battle quickly escalated into a low-grade psychological war waged in the shadows. Gregory and Sylvia were leveraging every bureaucratic pathway to build a history of instability that would validate their guardianship claim. The first sign was the phone calls. My work phone started ringing with blocked numbers. Calls from my health insurance provider. They weren't asking about my upcoming donor surgery. They were inquiring about recent inpatient psychiatric admissions. Following Raquel's advice, I immediately requested a full itemized statement of all mental health claims filed under my name for the last 6 months. When the packet arrived, I felt a familiar cold dread. It contained not one, but several detailed invoices for intensive psychological treatment and even short-term inpatient stays at various facilities across the Cleveland metro area. Each one was dated after the Thanksgiving confrontation, and each bore a clumsily forged electronic signature. The fraud was extensive. They had created a paper trail of imaginary mental illness, complete with fabricated diagnoses and prescribed treatments, all billed directly to my insurance. The consequences were immediate. The insurance company temporarily suspended a significant portion of my coverage, citing unexplained high-volume claims and potential fraud. Worse, the representative stated flatly that if they couldn't confirm the legitimacy of the claims within 48 hours, they would be legally obliged to report the suspected malingering or mental instability to the Human Resources Department at Orion Ridge Data Works. This was Gregory and Sylvia's ultimate maneuver, using paper fraud to threaten the stability of my career. Losing my high-level job would instantly validate their claim that my financial decisions were irrational and that I was incapable of supporting myself, let alone donating an organ. The surveillance escalated to harassment on the home front. One rainy night, around 10:30 p.m., there was a loud, authoritative knock on my door. I looked through the peephole to see the unmistakable reflection of police lights flashing across my tiny hallway. I opened the door to find two uniformed officers, one male, one female, looking stern. "We received a 911 call from a concerned family member," the female officer stated. "They reported hearing shouting, breaking glass, and concern that you were attempting self-harm or violent destruction of property." I stepped back, allowing them to look into my apartment. The place was meticulously tidy, the way an overworked data analyst keeps things, clean, sparse, and organized. There was no broken glass, no sign of violence, and certainly no screaming. I explained the ongoing legal dispute, the guardianship petition, and the history of financial exploitation. The female officer, Sergeant Davies, looked skeptical but professional. "Look, Ms. Hurst," she said, her voice dropping. "This is the kind of situation we deal with a lot. Family disputes get ugly. But if we receive another call like this, especially one that takes us away from legitimate emergencies, there could be consequences." She paused, handing me her card. "However, if you feel you are being harassed, call the non-emergency line, or call me directly, and start recording all your interactions with these people." The encounter was deeply unsettling. They weren't just using paperwork. They were leveraging law enforcement to disrupt my life and create a public record of instability. I immediately started carrying my phone, recording every interaction, every strange phone call, every unexpected knock. I returned to the itemized insurance statement and focused on the names of the facilities. One of them, the Riverview Behavioral Clinic, triggered a forgotten memory. It was the low-key facility where Sylvia had quietly gone for a 2-week stay 3 years ago for anxiety management. The connection hit me. They hadn't just invented the diagnoses. They were using established connections and potentially stolen login credentials from one of Sylvia's previous legitimate treatments to create a credible, continuous thread of mental health issues for me. The forged history was being constructed with material stolen from the margins of their own lives. The final blow came directly to my professional life. My HR department at Orion Ridge Data Works forwarded me an anonymous letter. The subject line was aggressive. Concerning behavior of Lillian Hurst, the letter accused me of bringing private emotional instability into the workplace, detailed my erratic work hours, and claimed I was showing signs of paranoia in office meetings. The claim was ridiculous. My performance reviews were stellar, but it forced me into a defensive meeting with my HR representative. I had to reveal the guardianship petition, the theft, and the family conspiracy, all while trying to maintain a veneer of professional composure. It was a humiliating, exhausting necessity, a direct result of their campaign to poison my reputation. Gregory and Sylvia were brilliantly, ruthlessly attempting to construct a paper patient, a fictional Lillian Hurst with a deep, dark history of mental illness. When I walked into the courtroom, any display of anger, stress, or even passionate defense would be instantly interpreted by the judge, based on their fabricated documents, as just another symptom of the delusion they had manufactured. Raquel was the steady anchor. "This is good. Lillian," she insisted, reviewing the new evidence. "They are overplaying their hand. The more bizarre, the more simultaneous the coincidences, the police call, the HR letter, the fraudulent insurance claims, the easier it will be to prove to a judge that this isn't genuine illness. This is a highly organized campaign of abuse and fraud designed to steal your autonomy." We had the motive, the means the IP trace, and now, the overwhelming pattern of their escalating criminal activity. We just had to hold out for 7 more days. The morning of the hearing was bitter cold. A thin, gray layer of snow dusted the granite steps leading up to the Cuyahoga County Courthouse. I walked with Raquel, the weight of a 1,000-page binder filled with financial records and medical statements feeling oddly light compared to the psychological burden I carried. We entered the courtroom early. It was a somber, wood-paneled room, the kind of place where private tragedy became public record under fluorescent lights. When Gregory and Sylvia arrived, they looked meticulously curated for the performance. Gregory wore a conservative dark suit, his face set in a look of grave, sorrowful concern. Sylvia was in tailored beige, her pearl necklace catching the muted light, embodying the perfect, struggling middle-class wife. They had mastered the aesthetic of respectability, suggesting they were the pillars of the community, tragically forced to protect their daughter from herself. Leon sat in the gallery immediately behind them. He wore a trendy yet muted gray hoodie over a crisp collared shirt, his hair perfectly neat. He was playing the role of the distraught younger brother, his body language communicating deep, passive concern for his erratic older sister. Then I saw Ivy. She was seated between Gregory and Sylvia, held captive by their proximity. Her illness was evident. She looked pale and small, her fingers occasionally pressing against her lower back or side, a faint, almost imperceptible gesture of discomfort. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was a silent, living prop in their legal drama, her very presence a testament to my supposed irresponsibility. The opposing counsel, a sharp, polished man, opened the proceedings for the petitioners. He began by painting me as a victim of my own brilliance. "Your Honor," he started, his voice resonating with theatrical empathy, "this is the heartbreaking story of a talented young woman, Lillian Hurst, a senior analyst who, tragically, became overwhelmed by the pressures of her demanding career. The intense hours, the isolation, the sheer magnitude of her work led to a severe, verifiable clinical depression that has metastasized into paranoia." He argued that the breakdown had manifested in a cruel and dangerous attempt to sever all family bonds. Gregory was the first witness. His voice broke as he described the transformation of his daughter. "Lillian used to be so loving, Your Honor, so generous. Now, she's cold, distant, a stranger." He turned slightly toward the judge, tears welling convincingly in his eyes. He claimed that I had become obsessed with the kidney donation, viewing it not as a medical procedure, but as a perverse act of redemption or penance. He argued this was proof that my decision-making was clouded, that I lacked the sound mind to weigh the risks versus the benefits of losing an organ. Sylvia then took the stand, her voice immediately thick with manufactured grief. She described the harrowing moment I had abruptly cut off all access to the family accounts, their life support. She twisted the narrative, claiming my decision had left them without the necessary funds for Ivy's essential medications, falsely conflating the seizure of their luxury spending money with a threat to Ivy's life. The opposing counsel then presented the evidence. They projected the carefully cropped text messages onto a screen, the ones where I had told Leon to fund his own life, framing them as proof of my irrational jealousy. Lillian felt threatened by Leon's success, Your Honor, the lawyer insisted, and began to systematically destroy his business opportunity out of spite, a clear indication of a person losing control of her own emotional stability. Then came the fabricated medical narrative. The lawyer read excerpts from the dubious psychiatric report from Dr. Vance, detailing my high risk for self-harm and profound isolation. They submitted the forged insurance claims as physical proof of my recent, volatile inpatient treatment. The affidavits from the neighbors were read aloud, reinforcing the image of a woman who was a near recluse, working unusual hours, and keeping her life literally in the dark. The cumulative effect was devastatingly effective. They had taken every single functional aspect of my life, my focus, my professionalism, my desire for privacy, my physical sacrifice, and successfully weaponized it against me. I watched the judge. He was an older man, stoic and professional. But as he flipped through the thick stack of documents, the psychiatric reports, the notarized affidavits, the tearful testimony of the perfect parents, his expression grew increasingly troubled. I felt the immense weight of the system pressing down, the burden of proof, the sheer audacity of their lie, the calculated use of the law. The scales were tipping. If Raquel couldn't find a way to tear down this beautiful, monstrous lie, my entire life, my career, my money, and the final say over my own body would be placed into the hands of the very people who had just stolen the surgery fund to pay for an opening night party. The thought was a cold, sharp terror. Raquel Avery stood up, the polished wood of the defense table reflecting the stark courtroom light. While the petitioner's attorney had relied on emotional testimony and fabricated documents, Raquel's presentation was purely analytical, built on undeniable data. She was about to systematically dismantle the narrative piece by agonizing piece. She began quietly, addressing the judge. "Your Honor, we move to closely examine the affidavits presented by the petitioners, specifically those from the alleged concerned neighbors who claim to have observed my client's unstable behavior." Raquel's voice sharpened as she pointed out the flaws in their procedural execution. She highlighted that all 5 affidavits had been notarized by the same person, on the exact same day, despite the witnesses living in geographically distinct areas. She then projected a split screen displaying 2 of the witness statements. The phrasing, down to the use of specific, unusual terminology, was identical. This suggests not independent observation, but coordinated transcription, Raquel stated. She then called the first 2 paid witnesses, the neighbors the private investigator had interviewed, to the stand. Under direct examination, they faltered immediately. Confronted with the digital audio recording secured by Raquel's team, the flimsy facade collapsed. "Did you personally observe Ms. Hurst showing signs of deep paranoia or self-harm?" Raquel asked the first witness. He squirmed. "No, she keeps to herself, but I didn't know." "Did you receive cash payment from an acquaintance of Leon Hurst to sign the affidavit?" The witness's voice was barely audible. "Yes, a few $100s. The second witness confirmed the same pattern. The judge watched, his initial skepticism turning into professional alarm. The foundation of the petitioner's case, the independent testimony of my alleged mental decline, had just evaporated. Raquel then called our technical expert, the digital specialist, who had traced the conspiracy. The specialist, a matter-of-fact woman, presented her forensic report on a large screen visible to the entire courtroom. "Your Honor, we traced the Internet Protocol, or IP, addresses for the 2 key pieces of fraudulent digital evidence," she explained, using simple, declarative sentences. First, the email sent to the bank authorizing the withdrawal of the Lillian Hurst Surgical Trust funds. Second, the repeated, unauthorized inquiries to Ms. Hurst's health insurance regarding fictitious inpatient psychiatric stays. She pointed to a map of Cleveland and Columbus on the screen. In 100% of the recorded instances of digital fraud against Ms. Hurst, the originating IP address was static and registered to the Cleveland residential address of Gregory and Sylvia Hurst, the petitioners. The courtroom absorbed the shock. Gregory's face went white. Sylvia gasped, clutching his arm. Leon stared at the screen, momentarily losing his carefully rehearsed, concerned expression. The conspiracy was no longer an accusation. It was a verifiable geographic fact. The opposing counsel scrambled, attempting to object to the technical evidence, but the judge, visibly impatient now, overruled him, sensing the depth of the deception. Raquel had set the stage for the final, devastating reveal. "We now call Dr. Elias Monroe to the stand," she announced. Dr. Monroe, the chief transplant surgeon from St. Alban Medical Center in Boston, entered the room. His presence, the authoritative weight of a leading medical professional, was a stark contrast to the earlier procession of paid witnesses. He confirmed Ivy's condition. Ivy Hurst suffers from advanced, congenital renal disease. Her kidney function is declining, and a living donor transplant, specifically from her sister, Lillian, who is an optimal match, offers the best chance for long-term survival and quality of life. We are currently operating within a golden window of the next 2 to 3 years before mandatory, debilitating dialysis becomes inevitable. Raquel then pivoted to my competence. Dr. Monroe confirmed that I had successfully navigated the intense psychological screening process. Ms. Hurst understood the risks perfectly. She showed no signs of delusion, mental distress, or being compelled by any outside force. She was one of the most lucid, altruistic donors I have evaluated in my 25 years in this field. The judge leaned forward. And what about the surgery date, doctor? The date mentioned in the Thanksgiving conversation? Dr. Monroe paused, his gaze sweeping over the petitioners. The surgery, Your Honor, was scheduled, but the date had to be canceled. The hospital requires a minimum deposit of $190,000 to reserve the team and the facilities. Despite the existence of the dedicated Lillian Hurst Surgical Trust, the hospital has not received one single dollar of that deposit. The deadline passed 1 week ago. Raquel then moved to the large screen and projected the final, damning evidence, the bank statement. It showed the full wire transfer of the $190,000 from the trust. Right beside it, she displayed the corresponding invoices from the event management company for Leon's bar launch, itemizing the deposit for the 30-piece live jazz band, the rare scotch, the venue rental, and the contract for the high-end fireworks display. The numbers matched perfectly. Ivy, who had been sitting quietly, looking down, lifted her head to the screen. She saw the evidence of the luxury party, the fireworks, the lavish spending, juxtaposed with the surgical deposit form that was now overdue. She turned slowly to face Leon, her face pale, her voice a shaking whisper that carried through the stunned silence of the room. That was for my kidney. You knew that. Leon, you knew. And you sold it for a party? Leon, stripped of his lies, could only stammer a strangled, inarticulate sound. Raquel stepped back from the defense table, her voice clear and powerful, delivering the final summation. Your Honor, this is not the story of a daughter abandoning her family. This is the story of a family that attempted to steal the last, most fundamental things she owned. Her own money, her own body, and her right to save her sister's life. The silence following Raquel's final statement was heavier than the snow falling outside. The judge, having reviewed the forensic evidence, the contradictory witness statements, and the authoritative medical testimony of Dr. Monroe, finally looked up from his bench. His voice was firm and unyielding as he delivered his ruling. The court has heard the evidence. This petition for guardianship is not only wholly unsupported, but is revealed to be a calculated and malicious attempt to exploit a competent individual. The first hammer blow landed. The court denies the petition for guardianship over the person and estate of Lillian Hurst in its entirety. Ms. Hurst is hereby deemed fully competent, mentally and financially. A visible tremor ran through Gregory's body. Sylvia let out a small, strangled whimper. The judge was not finished. He leaned into the microphone, his tone hardening from judicial dismissal to criminal outrage. The court finds clear, overwhelming evidence of the following: systematic abuse of the guardianship process, perjury, forgery of medical records and insurance claims, and calculated financial fraud involving over $190,000 earmarked for a life-saving medical procedure. The second, devastating blow. This court will immediately transmit the full case record, including all forensic reports, witness statements, and banking documents, to the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office for investigation and the filing of criminal charges. The courtroom erupted into a low buzz, quickly silenced by the bailiff. The judge then addressed the financial consequences. Gregory, Sylvia, and Leon were jointly ordered to bear all court fees and to reimburse me for the full legal costs incurred during my defense. Furthermore, given the pending criminal investigation into the fraudulent withdrawal of the surgical trust, the judge indicated that their remaining personal assets were subject to temporary freeze. the foundation of their opulent life, built on my silent subsidy, had just been declared structurally unsound. The moment of the family's total collapse was intensely personal. Sylvia was openly weeping now, reaching desperately for Ivy's hand. The instinct to maintain the image of the protective mother paramount even in ruin, but Ivy, rigid with shock and the cold realization of the betrayal, pulled her hand back sharply, physically rejecting her mother's touch. "The surgery fund," Ivy whispered, her voice raw, directed solely at Sylvia. "You sold my surgery for the fireworks on Leon's roof. You chose a party over my health." Ivy stood up, her movement slow and difficult, leaving her chair empty beside her parents. Behind them, the room was chaos. The investors who had come to show support for Leon's Zenith project were now on their feet, their faces a mixture of fury and panic. They realized the funding for the bar was fraudulent, the entire venture tainted by theft, and Leon's future was now a legal liability. Leon tried to slip away, melting into the crowd, but the investors surrounded him, their low, angry voices demanding answers. His short-lived career as an entrepreneur ended right there, in the public gallery of the courthouse. Gregory, meanwhile, focused his last ounce of performative energy on me. He tried to rush toward the defense table, his hands open in a plea. Lillian, please, we are family. We can still fix this if you just come home." I stepped back, putting Raquel between us. I was no longer interested in giving him access to my emotions or my guilt. I simply pointed to Raquel. "If you have anything to say to me, Father, you will speak to my counsel." Then, I felt a gentle, tentative touch on my arm. It was Ivy. She was standing beside me, looking up with genuine remorse, not the guilt-tripping shame I was used to seeing. "I'm so sorry, Lillian," she murmured, "for everything, for not standing up for you sooner, for not seeing how truly sick they are." I pulled her into a tight, fierce hug. It was the first honest human connection I'd felt in that building. I didn't promise her an immediate resolution. I didn't promise her the surgery would be rescheduled tomorrow, but I made her one promise that mattered. "It's okay, Ivy," I whispered. "But listen to me. From this moment forward, every single decision about your health, your body, and your future is ours. It is no longer conditional on their approval or their wallet." Raquel, ever the pragmatist, guided me toward a rear exit. "The press is waiting outside. Lillian, they want the family drama. Let's not give them the show." I agreed. I had just fought to keep my life from becoming their drama. I wasn't about to hand it over to the national news cycle. Outside, in the gray, snow-dusted parking lot, I stood by my worn-out car. I turned, looking back at the solid, stone edifice of the courthouse. In that building, I hadn't just won back the money. I had retained the ownership of my own narrative, my own decisions, and my own body. My phone vibrated, a text message from Gregory. "We can still mend this, Lillian, if you just come home." I looked at the screen, and without hesitation, without reply, I deleted the text. I started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, and merged onto the highway, leaving behind not just a verdict, but the oppressive, 12-year-long weight of an imaginary debt. Thank you so much for listening to Lillian's story. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on this family's toxic betrayal. Be sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Smash that like button and hit the hype button to help this video get heard by more people.